All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Urban Files, where we discuss anything and everything about the cities that we work, live, and play in. So, Max, I understand that you've been having a pretty good summer for yourself. I know that you had the opportunity to travel to the West Coast, right? To San Francisco, right? And Portland, maybe?
Yeah. California. We were in Los Angeles as well. That's where we started, and then took a trip up the coast in an RV to San Francisco, and then eventually Portland. And that was basically our month of June.
Well, yeah, it's pretty great. So what drew you out there specifically? And what was the kind of the context behind being
Right.
on the West Coast?
Yeah, we were attending something called the World Domination Summit. It was 3 years in the making because the original conference that we were going to attend in 2020 of the World Domination Summit, it was postponed because of COVID and then postponed yet again. So finally, 2022 was the culmination. In fact, this was to be the 10th and final World Domination Summit, which made it just an even bigger buildup with the 2 year delay. And I keep mentioning what it's called, and I'm kind of feeling like I can't keep saying the World Domination Summit without giving any more details or context. It's not anything too insane. It's basically a conference for people, I would say, uh, unconventional people pursuing unconventional lives. That's essentially what it is. And so you just have a lot of people trying to do things differently. Some really, really big things, like world-changing projects, and some just like things for themselves within their own lives, but essentially trying to break the mold and do something different from the sort of the typical life, the status quo, and so forth. So you had a lot of people like us who are nomads traveling around the country or around the world. And for us, this is something that's been penciled in for a couple of years now. So we were plotting our nomadic travels to make our way to the West Coast and eventually up to Portland for the summit.
Well, I'm glad you were able to experience at least some of it. You guys had a really good time. I'm also really glad that you guys were courageous enough to try RV life. I'm not sure that Alex and I would even be that brave. So I applaud you, and I'm glad that it all went well. And you really got to see some gorgeous scenery and some gorgeous cities.
Yeah,
So
the RV portion, we can get into this another time, but the RV portion was just it was somewhat luck involved, because of circumstances that we decided to do that. And so yeah, I wasn't really planning around an RV trip, but we kind of stumbled into it, and it turned out great. It was my first time living in an RV, first time driving an RV, and also the first time driving up the PCH in California. So getting to see the beautiful Pacific Ocean from many different vantage points. So.
that's awesome. That's fantastic. So I know one of the general commentaries on US cities, and it's kind of almost like a boogeyman of sorts, has become the West Coast cities. And I think San Francisco and Portland in the last couple of years have become a victim of that. So I was curious about what your observations were on the ground of kind of like if things felt pretty safe still to you, and also if there was a notable presence of homelessness compared to some of the other cities that you've been in around the US.
Right. Well, and I always give this caveat when I'm asked to share my personal experiences. I just want to be clear that these are uh, this is what I saw during my brief visit to the particular places that I was in, right? And so it's not like I was going in to actually study this carefully, look at numbers, be very comprehensive, but it's just sort of what I came across as in our travels. And so, yeah, I mean, where we were, obviously to a degree is sort of selective. Where we were was mostly very nice, sort of the way you always remember it, you know. California, blessed with all this natural beauty, natural resources. Um, it's more or less, it was more or less just a wonderful time.
That's
And
awesome.
I know that when it comes to Los Angeles, for example, for Southern California, we were in Santa Monica, we were in, we went up to Malibu and a few of the popular sort of smaller towns between those two places, all very expensive, all somewhat exclusive communities. And so naturally, it, it was a nice time. It was very enjoyable.
Yeah.
Um, Got to spend close to a week in San Gabriel Valley, which is where we usually like to be for all of the Asian food, Asian amenities, all of that. You know, Walnut, Roland Heights,
Mm.
and so forth. Those areas, that was a treat for my wife. We were hitting up grocery stores and restaurants multiple times a day. Uh,
Making me hungry thinking about it because I'm guessing LA probably has like just about the best Asian food that you could get outside of Asia, pretty much.
Yeah, it's debatable, but certainly is very good. I don't want to split hairs about this, but it's definitely world class Asian cuisine. So we weren't really going to areas where you would see or hear about large homeless encampments, and we weren't really in we weren't in downtown LA for this trip. We didn't really see much of the core core cities, and so that, you know, that it was a very biased sort of perspective and overview. Um, but my takeaway from that is certainly that there are plenty of places in Southern California that are thriving, and you don't want to brush away any issues, because there certainly are going to be plenty of issues within the community and socioeconomic stuff and uh, all of that. But the idea that this is not a nice place to live and that people are running away in droves is maybe not entirely accurate.
Yeah, definitely hyperbole, at least in the case of the experiential aspect of living there. I mean, I think if anything, the people that move away from a place like a Portland or a San Francisco or an LA are probably doing so because it's so expensive. And I think that would be, if it were as bad as people seem to think it is in some cases, not all cases, right? But some people think that way. If it was, it wouldn't probably be as expensive as it is. I mean,
Yeah,
usually there's kind of a supply and a demand going there.
right.
And so that would stand to reason it's,
Yeah.
there's probably some pretty nice parts of town.
Yeah. So, I mean, what I said just now, that was for LA. It probably can apply broadly to California and the West Coast. But I'll say that personally, experientially, we did have more of that sort of urban, gritty experience when we headed up to San Francisco and Portland as well. So in San Francisco, it didn't strike me to be quite to the level that I I thought I might witness, but there was plenty of visible homelessness. There was plenty of I would say not just visible homelessness, but to the point where you'd imagine that a lot of these people uh, were functioning in society and just couldn't afford a place, a permanent roof, you know,
Yeah.
not, um, you know, what you might find in other cities where you come across a lot of people who are perhaps have mental issues or other reasons. But this, it, you know, to me, felt like quite a few people who were um, probably working their best and trying to get by, and just didn't, because of countless issues with housing in San Francisco, from
Yeah.
lack of supply to that insane prices and all of that. It made it kind of awkward. My brother-in-law lives on a street in the Mission that is, the Mission is it's not the best place, but it's not horrible either. And yet, you'd have like a dozen tents right there along his block. And
Wow.
it seems like everybody kind of learns to coexist. Um, and and unfortunately, it's like almost like this is the way it is now, you
Yeah.
know.
Yeah.
Um, and yeah, and so putting my, again, like I said, I was not, it didn't strike me as being shocking. I kind of was expecting that. I was probably expecting more, worse than what I did see. But for my wife, it's her impression, it was almost enough for her to reconsider San Francisco being her favorite city in the country, which it
Okay.
has been for many years, and where she absolutely wanted to move to if the opportunity presented itself. And now she was almost thinking, well, we spent some time in Oakland. And I think it's funny because San Francisco and Oakland, they're both very diverse cities, lots of different pockets, different neighborhoods. But just because of where we were in Oakland versus where we were spending time in San Francisco, she was thinking,
Oakland felt nicer
yes,
in those parts. Yeah. Yeah. Which is
exactly.
not going to be the always case because I
Right,
mean, obviously, crime statistics
right,
tend to reflect that Oakland is one of the more dangerous cities on the entire West Coast. But that is maybe a cautionary tale about crime statistics in general, because what it says is even in an area maybe known for crime more, or a certain type of vibe, you can find plenty of nice, safe areas intermingled within that. And that is what you guys
yeah,
experience. I think there's definitely something to be said for the fact that you guys had a nice time in Oakland.
yeah, definitely. Yeah, and your point is obviously a good one. So when it comes to homelessness, I'll transition to Portland as well. Portland had some of the same going on in its downtown area. You did see tents, little tent encampments, in different blocks of downtown. Um, but again, it was far lesser degree of this than um, some of what I had seen in the media and all that
Yeah.
portrayed over the last 2 years. With COVID, and then with the protests and all of that, painting it as sort of like a chaotic scene and sort of lawlessness in parts of downtown Portland. And maybe that was more accurate back, a year ago, a year and a half ago. But from what I saw, it was much, much less than what I imagined it might have been before. So I mean, that's a positive if things are rebounding. I don't know. That's just what
Yeah.
I, yeah. So
No, that's good to know. And I mean, I think that makes sense that it's, like it was very much a period of everything being shut down, which created a certain type of environment, anyways. And on top of that, you definitely did have some riots and looting that were present. I'm wondering how much of this too, with some of the Renaissance, is a place like Portland is kind of like it has that nickname of like being like a place where the young go to retire. I think that's a reference from Portlandia,
yeah,
but like Portland is a place that hasn't really been known, especially always, as having that strong of a jobs market. So I can't help but wonder if maybe there's more of an in migration there from other West Coast cities because now it doesn't really matter as much for
right.
information workers. They can live in Portland and it's cheaper. So now why not? Right. So
Yeah, I
that's
mean,
interesting.
one thing, I guess in this day and age, it seems like compared to 20 years ago and prior to that, people want to live where they want to live, and then they figure out the rest. That's all secondary. And so,
Right.
especially with remote work being so prevalent now, it makes it that we choose to be where we just would most like to be. And Portland, despite sort of the narrative about it in some circles, Portland has a couple clear advantages, in my opinion. The way it's physically laid out, and its transit infrastructure, micro mobility infrastructure, is just super conducive to a very car light lifestyle and walkable lifestyle. I a lot of there've been a lot of cities that I've traveled to over the last 5 years, I'd say, or so, that I felt a little bit surprised by the number of cool neighborhoods that they have, the number of the Renaissance, the stuff that's happening. It's like, oh, this is great. It's sometimes it's more than what I've heard on paper or in the various places that we do our research. But Portland just completely blew me away, because it wasn't about, oh, what are the cool neighborhoods in Portland? It's literally that the entire
The
city
entire city is a
is
cool
just a
neighborhood.
collection. It's a collection of many cool neighborhoods. You don't. I feel like in most metros, you might ask people, what's your favorite neighborhood, and you get like maybe 4 or 5 places pop up all the time. But in
Yeah.
Portland, it just seems like everybody who lives wherever they live is repping their neighborhood.
Yeah.
And it makes sense because it's very well connected. So wherever you are on the map, you more or less, and I don't want to exaggerate, but more or less you can get around to many other cool neighborhoods from where you're at. And that was something that struck me. And so if this is that lifestyle that you're into, then there's almost no better place.
That's good to know. Yeah. Yeah. Well, I'm glad you had a great time. Obviously, it's a gorgeously placed city, and you could say the same for San Francisco too. And I'm sure, being summer especially, it was a very desirable place to be. You briefly touched on transit. Did you get a chance to take transit some, or did you have a pretty good experience with that in San Francisco, Portland overall?
Yeah. So yeah, LA we did not, but when we got to San Francisco, it was we were using the Muni a bit, and the BART a lot, and you know, it was as expected. I've never thought that the transit in San Francisco was super efficient, from my recollection, as well as what a lot of people share. It's it's one of the big cities where you can validly complain about the transit, because while it's there and it's available, it's just not super efficient, right? Um, and so, having said that, I had also heard, about the dangers of the transit, especially over the last couple of years, and just maybe how dirty or miserable it might be to take BART. And I didn't experience that. I thought it was okay.
Yeah.
I'm not going to rave about it, but I didn't feel unsafe. I didn't feel like this was super frustrating or anything like that.
Yeah.
We rode it quite a bit for the week that we were there, and I just remember one time, one experience where there was like a couple delays, and it was kind of concerning. But then everything ended up being okay. So.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, that was my experience in San Francisco. Now, having said that, then when we got to Portland, we were very impressed. It wasn't just me and my wife, but also her parents were with us. And these aren't really transit riding people. They've always lived in a car culture. I'd say, aside from probably visiting Hong Kong often. Besides that, my in-laws don't really have any experience with a sort of a carless environment, and they and we took the mostly took the streetcar around in downtown area of Portland, but occasionally we were also riding buses and the light rail, and they were tagging along with us everywhere, and they were very impressed and thought that this was the way, like they felt like this is how things should be, right? And that was pretty interesting to me
That's good. It's
to see.
good. Yeah.
I was always worried throughout the whole time. I was talking to my wife, like, oh, is this going to be a little bit of a pain, because taking transit was going to be like an extra 30% time to get to where we wanted to be. Like, I was always like, should we call an Uber? I had a Zipcar membership for specifically for our time in Portland. And I was always like, should we take the Zipcar? Should we ride Uber and things like that? And she was like, yeah, they're good with transit, and they really, really loved it. One other note about the Portland transit system is that a day pass is $5, and
that's a pretty good deal.
And what I especially like about it is that you don't have to buy a pass for $5. What you do is just ride the trains, and once you hit $5 for the day, then that's the most you're going to pay.
That's awesome. That's
and
awesome.
so they make it very easy. There's no like strategies or gotchas. It's just boom. And also a flat rate on the light rail means that we could ride all the way out to we went to Washington Park for the Rose Test Garden, which is a little ways out of downtown. And then another time we went all the way out to the Nike World Headquarters. And
Yeah.
it's just, $2 each way,
Yeah.
covering that long distance. So the transit system really impressed me. Portland also has a ton of scooters, just everywhere. And I took my first scooter ride.
Nice.
It was
Glad you
very
finally
easy. Yeah.
good experience, huh?
Yeah, very easy to get around. I was thinking about you with your experience on those e-bikes, as I was
Yes.
riding along the river in my scooter, and
Oh
and
yeah.
yeah, it just feels like there's so many different options to get where you want to go in the Portland area. We're mostly downtown, like I said, but generally speaking, I feel like I saw a lot of similar infrastructure when I left downtown as well. So.
That's great to hear. I mean, it sounds like you had a really good time. So that's awesome. So well, I know you have an even bigger trip coming up, so we'll have to touch base on that
That's
next.
true. This may be the last time you all see me for this year, at least in the U.S. But we'll try and do one more before we head over to Asia. So
Yeah.
yeah.
All right. Well, it's been fun.
All right. Take care.